Hello and welcome to the Orthodox Oasis. My name is Jerome Hieronymus, and what you're about to watch is a VOD of the Orthodox Oasis over on Twitch. So feel free to join us live as we play games, hang out, and chat about Orthodox stuff. Otherwise, enjoy this VOD and we'll see you soon. Have a great day. Let's jump into that. Where were we? Here. I believe we're about to assault the castle of Finn, reclaim it from the Empire, and then probably go kick the Empire's butt somewhere. But we'll see. Otherwise...
The Orthodox Church is
and
the
we can hear that.
Church, the
Excellent.
Church of Holy Tradition. And those who count
All
themselves
right.
as Orthodox Christians share a uniquely historical consciousness, understanding that the saints, priests, and Orthodox laymen of the past play a crucial part in their journeys toward salvation. However, there is one area of Orthodox history that very few of us know anything about: the story of Orthodoxy in the Americas. Ancient Faith Radio is thus happy to present American Orthodox History with Matthew Namey. Matthew is a writer and lecturer specializing in early American Orthodoxy and the Associate Director of the Society for Orthodox Christian History in the Americas.
Welcome back to American Orthodox History. America has always been a bit of a frontier for Orthodoxy, and this was especially true in the 19th and early 20th century. Like the Wild West, this Orthodox frontier attracted some remarkable characters. Saints, yes, but also adventurers, renegades, and charlatans. One of the strangest personalities in early American Orthodoxy was the Reverend Agapius Honcharenko. Now, I don't actually know the true story of Agapius Honcharenko. I don't think anyone does. Honcharenko told the biggest fish stories you've ever heard, and his autobiographical anecdotes need to be taken with a pretty big chunk of salt. Some people, taking his words at face value, have memorialized him as some sort of folk hero. He's recently been described as, quote, a prominent scholar, humanitarian, and early champion for human rights. Of course, the real story is a lot more complicated. Honcharenko was born in 1832. At least, I'm pretty sure he was born in 1832. That seems to be the general consensus. But in 1865, the New York Times reported that he was 50 years old, which would put his birth around 1815. Now, this may be an error. It's also possible, though, that Honcharenko actually told the paper that he was 50 rather than in his early 30s. Anyway, he was born in the Russian Empire, in what is now Ukraine. He was apparently educated at one of the theological academies in Russia. I say apparently because I haven't actually verified this, and Honcharenko is not exactly the most trustworthy source. In his own time, newspapers reported that he was a graduate of the Ecclesiastical Academy in St. Petersburg. But more recent sources say that he attended the Kiev Theological Academy and then entered the famous Kiev Caves Lavra. In 1857, Honcharenko was sent to Athens, in Greece, to serve as the deacon in the chapel of the Russian embassy. While he was there, he began to contribute articles to a publication known as Kolokol, which in English means the bell. And this publication was edited by a man named Alexander Herzen. Alexander Herzen was a Russian exile in London, and Kolokol was a socialist journal. Honcharenko's articles criticized the Orthodox clergy and the Orthodox Church. Here's where things begin to get really fuzzy. According to Honcharenko, in 1860, the Russian government learned about his articles and arrested him. They sent him to Constantinople as a prisoner, but when Alexander Herzen heard about this, he tried to arrange for Honcharenko's release. In the meantime, with the help of a Polish Jew who was selling oranges in Istanbul, Honcharenko disguised himself as a Turk and escaped. He hid for a while in the French quarter of the city, then fled to London and collaborated with Herzen on Kolokol, pushing for the liberation of the serfs in Russia. The Russian government then put a 5,000 ruble bounty on his head with the call for death by strangulation, and Honcharenko's brother was exiled to Siberia. Oh, and Honcharенko claims to have, quote, taken an active part in the Greek Revolution. Now, I'm not sure what that's supposed to mean, since the actual Greek Revolution was over before Honcharенko was even born. Honcharенko later said, "I will never forget that day I took off my priest's robes, put on a Turkish costume, and passed out before the faces of the guardians of the prison and escaped to London. Since then, by the Muscovite tyrants, I have been stabbed, shot, drugged, assaulted with brass knuckles, and even clubbed as a dog. I am yet alive as a true Cossack, and I labor to free my people." Anyway, after doing all of these things, Honcharенko came to the United States. At least, that's Honcharенko.
Very busy man.
The truth, I suspect, is probably different. See, Honcharенko arrived in the U.S. in 1864, about a month before Abraham Lincoln was assassinated. In fact, the Civil War was actually still going on. According to newspapers at the time, Honcharенko was sent by the Church of Greece with the blessing of the Archbishop of Athens. There weren't very many Greeks in America at the time, but they had apparently requested a priest the year before, and Honcharenko volunteered for the job. I have no idea how he ended up under the Church of Greece, but he didn't come to America as some kind of refugee. He served a liturgy in New York City in March of 1865, and this was the first known Orthodox liturgy to be served east of California. The Episcopalians in New York had let Honcharenko use their Trinity Chapel, and about 60 Greeks and 20 Slavs attended, along with about 50 curious Protestant clergymen. The occasion for the liturgy was actually, at least ostensibly, the anniversary of Tsar Alexander II's coronation, which is a bit ironic considering Honcharенko's claims about being persecuted by the Tsarist government. The liturgy itself made quite an impression on the Americans. A choir of Episcopalians did all the singing, using Slavonic music which had been transliterated into English. The creed was recited in English, and the Protestants in attendance were particularly struck by the absence of the filioque. It's pretty clear that the Russian government did not have a price on Honcharенko's head when he served that liturgy in New York. At least one Russian periodical at the time mentioned the liturgy and noted that Honcharenko was serving under the Church of Greece. Nothing about him being some sort of outlaw. Soon, though, a French Orthodox journal broke the news of Honcharенko's association with Alexander Herzen, the socialist editor. It also claimed that his ordination to the priesthood, which apparently was done by a Greek bishop, was, quote, irregular. I'm not sure what that means. Anyway, none of this was known in March of 1865. And after a few weeks in New York City, Agapius Honcharенko went to New Orleans, where there was a sizable community of Greeks. He's often named as the first pastor of Holy Trinity Church in New Orleans, which is considered to be the first Orthodox church in the continental United States. I don't really know if you can actually say he was the first parish priest, though. He certainly did visit and stay for a little while, and there's even a photo of him standing in front of the church building with the community, but he wasn't in New Orleans for very long. Before he left New York, the Times reported that he was only going to New Orleans for a short stay, with the purpose of baptizing some of the Orthodox people there. And one newspaper mentioned that there had been an Orthodox presence in the South for 20 years, but they had never had a priest. Honcharенko was in New Orleans for about a month, and during that time, the Russian ambassador discovered that Honcharenko had written those articles for Kolokol criticizing the church. The Russian ambassador contacted the Greek consul in New York, and the Greek consul arranged a meeting of the Orthodox that were living there, and they decided that they couldn't have Honcharenko as their pastor. One report says that the Russian government even promised to send a replacement and provide a church building. When Honcharenko returned from New Orleans, he found out that he was no longer welcome. Even the Episcopalians...
Hello, viewer. If you've made it past the ads, welcome to the Orthodox Oasis. My name is Jerome,
According to his own testimony,
and I'm playing some Final Fantasy tonight, listening to some American Orthodox history podcast.
25 cents a day. He then got hired by the American Bible Society to translate the Bible into Slavonic. He began to advertise himself as a linguist, calling for pupils and claiming that he was teaching Greek, Arabic, Romanian, Bulgarian, Slavonic, Russian, and Turkish. He would later claim that during this time, the Russian government even made multiple attempts to assassinate him and wounded him several times. Again, there's no evidence that that actually happened. Honcharенko later claimed that one of his students was a man named Eugene Schuyler, who was the American diplomat who later became ambassador to Russia. Honcharенko also supposedly knew such famous figures as Horace Greeley, the New York newspaper editor, and William Seward, the U.S. Secretary of State. In fact, Honcharенko even claimed that he was, quote, largely instrumental in securing the purchase of Alaska from Russia by the United States. He boasted that he had been the first person to discover gold in Alaska and had started the Klondike Gold Rush in 1867. He told one reporter, "It cost me 35 cents to discover Alaska." When Seward supposedly offered him a large payment for his help, Honcharенko refused, saying, "All I want is to see Alaska an American state." By the late 1860s, Honcharенko's story had descended ever deeper into the bizarre. Despite being a celibate priest and apparently a tonsured monk, he married an Italian woman in Philadelphia. She was the daughter of a radical Italian immigrant, and years later, newspapers would report that she had come with Honcharенko from Russia after the Tsar had put a bounty on his head. That's completely untrue. He actually married her in Philadelphia. Honcharенko and his wife, Albina, moved to Alameda County in the San Francisco Bay Area, which is where Oakland is, the same county as Oakland, California. They bought a farm, which Honcharенko named Ukraina. And it's an interesting place. Honcharенko supposedly introduced the Attica olive to California, and he experimented with breeding mushrooms and grapes. In fact, there's actually a grape named Honcharенko in his honor. He started a Russian-language revolutionary newspaper in 1868, supposedly, if you believe Honcharенko, with the help of Eugene Schuyler and William Seward. He also published a Russian-English phrase book, which he marketed for Americans traveling to Alaska. Honcharенko's newspaper was discontinued in 1872, and he, of course, blamed the Russian ambassador to America. He would later resurrect the paper and supposedly sent copies to be secretly distributed in Russia. He founded an organization called the Decembrists, which he hoped would bring about a peaceful revolution in Russia. I actually don't know if there were any members besides Honcharенko and his wife. He also claimed that multiple hitmen hired by the Russian government had been sent to kill him in California on multiple occasions. Honcharенko, by this point, had turned into something of a spectacle. In 1872, a newspaper in Maine, which of course was on the opposite end of the continent from Honcharенko's home in California, it mentioned that Honcharенko had recently begun wearing, quote, a spring suit of clothes made entirely from white bear skin. Every once in a while, some enterprising reporter would stumble upon Honcharenko and do a big story on the Apostle of Liberty and the Nihilist Priest, or various other nicknames. In 1893, Honcharenko made headlines by telling people that thousands of millionaire Siberian Jews were being exiled to America by the Tsar. The descriptions of Honcharenko matched the surviving photos. One reporter, a man named Will Clemens, visited Honcharenko in 1890, and Clemens wrote, "Presently a little old man, slightly stoop-shouldered, but vigorous and muscular, and quick in his movements, made his appearance, bearing a pail of milk warm from the udder. He was a singular-looking man, and the visorless cap of an Arctic fox skin which he wore heightened the picturesque effect of his long gray beard, his broad, high forehead furrowed deep with wrinkles of concentrated thought, and the twinkling, restless black eyes. When Father Honcharenko afterward removed his cap, it was observed that his hair was thin on the top of his head, and that he combed it back to cover the bald spot. Closer acquaintance revealed traits of character, a nervous enthusiasm, a keen sense of humor, a persistent purpose, and a lack of system." End quote. The facts of Honcharенko's life gradually began to fade, replaced by ridiculous exaggerations. He had been a modest deacon in the Russian embassy in Athens. But by 1913, he was referred to as the former ambassador to Greece from Russia. Honcharенко claimed that Leo Tolstoy, the great writer, was his, quote, spiritual child, because, according to Honcharенko, he had once heard Tolstoy's confession years before in Egypt. He began to be known in the newspapers as Tolstoy's confessor, despite the fact that Tolstoy probably had no idea who Agapius Honcharенko was. Honcharенko had long since cut himself off from the Orthodox Church. Just months after his 1865 visit to New York, one newspaper reported that he had been excommunicated for, quote, countenancing a church outside of the apostolic succession. In response, said the newspaper, Honcharенko would become a Presbyterian. A couple of years later, a Boston newspaper called him a swindler and a cheat, and reported that he had started a Russo-Greek Methodist Episcopal Church in San Francisco. The newspaper commented, "We hope there is no irreverence in the suggestion, but wouldn't it be well to have Trinity Chapel disinfected?" The Orthodox weren't too thrilled with Honcharенko either. In 1896, the Russian Orthodox American Messenger, which was the official newsletter of the Russian Church in America, ran a story on Honcharенko. They said, "A certain runaway monk Agapius Honcharенko, residing not far from the city of Alameda in California, on a farm of his own which he has named Ukraina, occasionally makes the local population aware of his existence by volunteering the most preposterous items of information concerning Russia and the Russian government. At one time, he was very busy intriguing against our Orthodox mission in San Francisco, especially during the episcopate of Bishop Ioannis, John. And now, at the close of his days, he apparently is at his old tricks again. Thus, he recently stated in the Examiner that Russian agents are persecuting him and that his life is in danger, that a price is set on his head, and other absurdities. Persons unfamiliar with our country might believe him. Therefore, we think it necessary to declare that not a soul in Russia takes the least interest in Honcharенko, and that all that he tells about the persecution he suffers from Russian agents is unmitigated nonsense, the driveling of a half-crazy old man. Russia will always be glad to make a present of such specimens to anybody that wishes them, so as to be rid of the bother of dealing with them at home." End quote. The locals in the nearby town of Hayward, California, weren't nearly so harsh. They found the Honcharenkos to be a pleasant couple. Quirky, yes, but also kind and hospitable. On New Year's Eve in 1909, the 77-year-old Agapius Honcharенko was gored by a cow, and a local doctor rushed to his aid. Hayward high school girls made day trips to visit the Honcharenko farm. In 1912, the Honcharenkos were behind on their mortgage payments and nearly lost their ranch, but some charitable townsfolk pitched in and saved them. A couple years after that, the Hayward community gave Honcharенko a surprise birthday party. When Mrs. Honcharенko died in 1915, numerous locals trekked out to the Honcharenko ranch for a burial service, which was conducted by a local Methodist clergyman. After his wife's death, Honcharenko's health noticeably declined. He died a little over a year later, in 1916, at the age, as best we can estimate, at the age of 83. Neighbors found his body, and a group of local ranchers conducted a simple funeral service. He was buried on his ranch next to his wife. Honcharenko hasn't been totally forgotten. About 40 years ago, a Ukrainian-American named Theodore Luciu published a pair of books about Honcharенko which portrayed him as a Ukrainian patriot and a champion of liberty. In 1999, through the efforts of Luciu and other Ukrainian-American activists, Honcharenko's Ukraina ranch was actually declared a registered landmark by the state of California. Hundreds of admirers, including a number of Ukrainian Orthodox and Catholic priests, converged on the ranch for the dedication. There was a joint memorial service for Honcharenko and his wife, and some actually called for the U.S. Post Office to issue a commemorative stamp in Honcharenko's honor. Earlier, I quoted a recent description of Honcharенko, which referred to him as a prominent scholar, humanitarian, and early champion for human rights. That's actually a quotation from the plaque at Ukraina, which was placed there by the California Department of Parks and Recreation. Of course, you could just as easily refer to him as an apostate, a liar, and a fraud. But, whatever your view on Agapius Honcharенko, you have to admit one thing. He was anything but boring.
You've been listening to American Orthodox History with Matthew Namey. Matthew is a writer and lecturer specializing in early American Orthodoxy and the Associate Director of the Society for Orthodox Christian History in the Americas. For supplemental material related to this episode, please visit orthodoxhistory.org. This has been a listener-supported presentation of Ancient Faith Radio.
What a wild character that guy was. Good gracious. He was out in the 1800s waddling. Just waddling. Let's see here. Where'd it go there? Agapius Honcharенko. And... ooh, let's see here. Father Ingram Nathaniel Irvine.
Hi, this is Bill Marianis, host of the live.
Hi, this is John Maddox, reminding you that it's your faithful support of Ancient Faith Radio that keeps us going strong 24 hours a day. Please go online now at ancientfaith.com and do what you can to support this ministry. Thank you.
The Orthodox Church is the historical church, the church of holy tradition. And those who count themselves as Orthodox Christians share a uniquely historical consciousness, understanding that the saints, priests, and Orthodox laymen of the past play a crucial part in their journeys toward salvation. However, there is one area of Orthodox history that very few of us know anything about: the story of Orthodoxy in the Americas. Ancient Faith Radio is thus happy to present American Orthodox History with Matthew Namey. Matthew is a writer and lecturer specializing in early American Orthodoxy and the Associate Director of the Society for Orthodox Christian History in the Americas.
Ingram Irvine,
Oh,
Father
no.
Nathaniel Irvine, was the most famous convert in the history of American Orthodoxy. Now, he probably isn't familiar to you. The first names that come to mind when you think of famous American Orthodox converts are probably names like St. Alexis Toth, Dr. Yaroslav Pelikan, maybe Father Peter Gilchrist in the Evangelical Orthodox, or perhaps Frankie Schaeffer. Yet combined, not one of those conversions was remotely as famous in its own day as that of Ingram N.W. Irvine. Like I said, today he's almost totally forgotten. If he's mentioned at all, it's as a minor footnote in the life of St. Tikhon or St. Raphael, who were the two bishops who ordained Irvine. But in his own day, Ingram Irvine was a national celebrity. His picture appeared in newspapers from coast to coast. Before he became Orthodox, he was probably the most famous Episcopal priest in America. And when he did convert to Orthodoxy, it was an international event. The Episcopal Church in America went crazy. Their presiding bishop wrote to Russia and demanded that St. Tikhon be removed from America for his outrageous action in ordaining Irvine. Irvine himself was an incredibly colorful figure. He had opinions on virtually everything, and he was a fantastic writer. He was also very passionate about American Orthodoxy, about an indigenous American expression of the Orthodox faith. Now, we don't have time today to give his life the full discussion that it deserves. But trust me, he'll be coming up again in future podcasts and also on our website, orthodoxhistory.org. You'll see him frequently if you visit the website. Today, I would like to introduce Irvine.
orthodoxhistory.org. orthodoxhistory.org. Ooh, go ahead and bookmark that. Oh, look, there's an update on the Father Raphael Morgan, which we listened to yesterday. Let's see what it says. An article in the Philadelphia Record, 1910, includes previously unknown details. The brief article notes that in 1910, Morgan was trying to set up a group in Philadelphia named the Orthodox Community of All Saints. Involved were former clergy, Protestant clergy, one Episcopal and one Methodist. Doesn't seem to have been an actual parish, but an ambitious aim of starting multiple churches and schools. How old is this? That was this year. They're still finding stuff. That is so cool. Busy guy, isn't he? Let me see if there's anything else on. Not on the front page, anyways. Interesting. I'll have to go check out that website later.
Talk about just who he was and just why he was so famous, give a bit of background, and then discuss why he became an Orthodox Christian in 1905. Ingram Irvine was originally from Ireland. He was born there in 1849. But he wasn't a Roman Catholic like so many Irishmen. He was an Anglican. He claimed to be somehow related to Oliver Cromwell, who was the Lord Protector of England in the 1600s. Ingram Irvine came to America when he was about 16. He attended General Theological Seminary in New York, which was the leading Episcopal church seminary. And he became an Episcopal priest in 1874, shortly after being married. His first parish assignment was on Long Island in Suffolk County, where he earned the incomparable nickname the Spurgeon of Brookhaven for his excellent preaching. Irvine moved around a lot, and he faced a huge number of challenges. He and his wife Emelina had 4 children, but only one lived to adulthood, and she would give him a lot of trouble. In the early 1880s, the Irvines were serving in Cairo, Illinois, and Ingram and Emelina helped nurse typhoid fever victims, but they soon got sick themselves, and so they moved to Wisconsin, their hope being that the cool Wisconsin air would help them get better. But Wisconsin wasn't just cool, it was freezing, and Irvine just got worse. Finally, in 1883, he ended up in Quincy, Illinois, where he became dean of the Episcopal Cathedral there. Immediately there were problems. Irvine got into some sort of dust-up with his bishop, Alexander Burgess. Now, the way Irvine tells it, Bishop Burgess facilitated a secret, uncanonical marriage involving a man who had illegally divorced his previous wife. Irvine was a very passionate defender of marriage, and this would not be the last time that he'd put himself on the line in a battle about divorce. Anyway, lots of accusations were thrown around, ranging from minor to serious, and the worst accusation against Irvine by far was that he had taken improper liberties with a young woman. Apparently, the Irvines had allowed this young woman to live at their house, and the young woman claimed that Ingram had taken advantage of her. But there were problems with her testimony. For one, she claimed that he had abused her on New Year's Eve, but the Irvines weren't in the city on New Year's Eve. And then it came out that she had accused plenty of other people of taking improper liberties with her as well. A dentist, a doctor, a minister from Long Island. She wasn't a reliable witness. There was an ecclesiastical trial, and Irvine was acquitted of all the serious charges. He was found guilty of certain specification, that's the phrase that was used, and he was suspended for a year. But Irvine wasn't satisfied with even that, and he fought these charges. He wanted to clear his good name entirely. In the end, Bishop Burgess wrote Irvine a letter of apology, and Irvine left town. The bishop would continue to blacken Irvine's name in the years to come, writing letters to various people complaining about Irvine, but this seems more than anything to have been a conflict of personalities. Now, Irvine would have more than his share of personality disputes. He was a strong personality, and he brought out some strong passions in other people. He next made headlines in Philadelphia. He was a pastor there, and there was a saloon right next door to his church. And some of the vestrymen were coming into the church drunk. Irvine wouldn't give these men communion, and predictably, this led to another conflict. Irvine won the ecclesiastical trial this time, but in the process, he resigned as pastor of the parish, and he was out of a job. For a while, he had a secular job, but in 1898, he transferred to the Diocese of Central Pennsylvania and became the pastor of St. John's Church in Huntington. Irvine's new bishop was a man named Ethelbert Talbot, and many years later, Talbot would become the presiding bishop of the entire Episcopal Church in America. Bishop Talbot was also an old seminary classmate of Irvine's. They knew each other from way back, and from what I can tell, Talbot appears to have made Irvine promise not to make any trouble at his new parish. He was giving Irvine one last shot at having a career in the church, but he knew that Irvine tended to attract controversy. Talbot apparently made Irvine promise that if he, Talbot, asked Irvine to resign, Irvine would do so without question. This was their deal. Well, you probably know what's coming next. Irvine got into yet another controversy. This time, he took on the richest woman in the parish, Emma D. Elliott. Emma Elliott and her
Don't be
husband,
messing with Elliott.
had both been married previously, and both had divorced their spouses. Irvine determined that based on the canons of the Episcopal Church in effect at the time, Emma was not allowed to take communion. But Irvine restrained himself, at least a little bit. He first wrote a letter to Bishop Talbot asking for Talbot's advice. Talbot told Irvine to gently enforce the canon, emphasis on gently. But Irvine just wasn't good at being gentle, and Emma Elliott was a very proud woman. And, unbeknownst to Irvine, the Elliots were great friends with Bishop Talbot. So now, Irvine was in hot water with his bishop yet again. Bishop Talbot wrote a letter to Alexander Elliot, and it was supposed to remain private, but when it came out, it was explosive. I'll read the most important part. And I'm quoting here. Talbot wrote, "I cannot find anything against Dr. Irvine for violation of morals or canons, but if you will have Mrs. Elliot prosecute him and have him convicted in a court of record, and I advise you to do so, I will unfrock the slimy fellow for you." End quote. The Elliots tried to have Irvine convicted of forgery, but that didn't work, and so then Talbot arranged for an ecclesiastical trial. It didn't work in the civil court, so he was going to go for a church court. Irvine was convicted of conduct unbecoming a clergyman, and on April 25th, 1900, Bishop Talbot solemnly defrocked him. If Talbot was hoping things would end there, he would be very disappointed. Irvine was not the sort of person to give up easily. He fought for 5 long years to have himself reinstated. He took the matter to ecclesiastical courts, to civil courts, even went up to the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania. J.P. Morgan, the great financier, he became interested in the case, had his lawyers look into it. Irvine's case made nationwide headlines. Newspapers reported on every detail of the drama, a virtual play-by-play, and Irvine was a celebrity. And he worked the media in a masterful way. In 1902, he wrote a book about the case, and he included pages and pages of original documents, which incidentally are invaluable in documenting his ministry throughout his life. But at the end of the day, all his efforts failed. And early in 1905, Irvine finally surrendered. He said in a statement, "I do not know what else can be done with Bishop Talbot but to forgive him." And with that, Ingram Irvine disappeared. But of course, that's not the end of our story, not by a long shot. On Pentecost, Irvine had something of a revelation. He felt that God was compelling him to become Orthodox. Some would later argue that Irvine was just taking the only option available to him. Since he couldn't remain a priest in the Episcopal Church, he'd just become Orthodox. But Irvine very strongly asserted that he did not become Orthodox simply to escape his problems in the Episcopal Church. He listed 7 reasons for his conversion to Orthodoxy, and I'll go through them really quickly with you here right now. First, Irvine said that, quote, "The Anglican Church is not the true platform of unity. She is too political and diplomatic, always compromising for expediency and shading like a chameleon to attract each Protestant sect," end quote. Second, Irvine said that the Anglican Church teaches the Filioque, which he couldn't accept. Third, he said that the Anglican Church, quote, "allows her bishops in some respects to be more papal than the Pope of Rome, and she gives to her laymen the casting vote in doctrine, discipline, and worship." Fourth, Irvine said that he thought he could best serve Christ according to his own conscience in the Orthodox Church. Fifth, he said that the Orthodox Church says just what she means and means just what she says. Sixth, he cited the unity of Orthodoxy, the shared doctrine, the common understanding of the sacraments, and so forth, things that were lacking in Anglicanism, where there was a wide diversity of beliefs. Seventh, he said, and I'm quoting again, "God the Holy Ghost, on the morning of Whitsunday, which is Pentecost, 1905, in St. Mary's Church, Philadelphia, in response to the inquiry of my soul, 'Lord, what wilt thou have me to do?' commanded me in an irresistible way, 'Go and work for the Holy Eastern Church,' and I was obedient unto the voice," end quote. And so Irvine approached his friend Father Sebastian Dabovich, who in turn informed St. Tikhon, who was the Russian bishop at that time. St. Tikhon looked into the circumstances surrounding Irvine's defrocking in the Episcopal Church, and he concluded that Irvine was worthy of ordination to the Orthodox priesthood. The ordination took place at St. Nicholas Cathedral in New York City on November the 6th, 1905. Saints Tikhon and Raphael officiated at the service, and St. Alexander Hodovitsky was Irvine's sponsor. Irvine's conversion made national news. The Washington Post did a full-page spread on the story, and the headline was, "Sensational Ending to Celebrated Case." The official Episcopal Church newspaper was outraged. Bishop Grafton, the famous Episcopal bishop of Fond du Lac, Wisconsin, and longtime friend of St. Tikhon, he was very concerned. He had been a close friend of St. Tikhon's from the time that St. Tikhon arrived in America in 1898, and Grafton's Nashotah House Seminary had recently given St. Tikhon an honorary doctorate. St. Tikhon, in response to all of this chaos, offered to basically give back the doctorate, and Grafton accepted. Their friendship would never be the same. Some loud Episcopalians thought that the Russian Holy Synod should remove St. Tikhon from America for his presumption. The Episcopalians were upset for 2 reasons, mainly. First of all, some viewed St. Tikhon as essentially a religious ambassador of Russia to America. It was all fine and good for him to administer his Russian flock, they said, but he had overstepped his bounds by interfering in the life of what they viewed as an autocephalous church. That's how the Episcopalians saw things. They adhered to branch theory, and so they thought that the Episcopal Church was just as much the church as any, the Russian Orthodox Church or the Patriarchate of Constantinople or the Church of Greece. Of course, the Orthodox response was that the Episcopal Church was not another autocephalous Orthodox church, and thus the Orthodox were under no obligation to acknowledge some kind of Episcopal Church jurisdiction over all of America. There was also the issue of the validity of Episcopal orders. Unlike the Orthodox, the Episcopalians saw holy orders as being indelible. In other words, once a priest, always a priest. For them, defrocking was something like a permanent suspension in Orthodoxy. So when St. Tikhon ordained Irvine, as far as the Episcopalians were concerned, he was repudiating their orders. He was saying, in effect, that their priests were not actually priests, and thus had to be, quote, reordained upon becoming Orthodox. St. Alexander Hodovitsky responded to this by saying, and I quote, "The matter of Anglican orders is quite an open question. until something definite is learned concerning it, we cannot here presume to set a precedent. Were we to go ahead and accept Dr. Irvine without first ordaining him, we would put ourselves in the place of schismatics, and surely would be regarded so by the Eastern Church." End quote. St. Alexander went on to say, "If the fact that we stick to the rules our church has set is to hurt us with our friends, we will be very sorry, but I cannot see that we can act differently." So Irvine was ordained. He was 56 years old, and he took the name Father Nathaniel, there being no Saint Ingram, and Nathaniel being one of his middle names. St. Tikhon put him in charge of English work. It was Irvine's job to promote the use of English in the Orthodox Church in the United States. He was to minister to the English-speaking children of Orthodox immigrants, and he was to spread Orthodoxy among Americans. Irvine dove into this task, just as he dove into every other task in his life. He wrote books and articles, he gave lectures, he championed Orthodoxy for the rest of his life. But his days of conflict and controversy were not over. We're out of time today, but next time we'll continue our discussion of
we got to
Father
keep
Gabriel
going.
Nathaniel Irvine.
This is juicy.
We'll
It's
focus
juicy.
on
It's good. It's great.
looking at some of his writings,
I need more.
his importance for Orthodoxy, both in the past and today.
You've been listening to American Orthodox History with Matthew Namey. Matthew is a writer and lecturer specializing in early American Orthodoxy and the Associate Director of the Society for Orthodox Christian History in the Americas. For supplemental material related to this episode, please visit orthodoxhistory.org. This has been a listener-supported presentation of Ancient Faith Radio. On the web...
Ancient Faith Radio. Let's go. Where's that part 2 at? Ooh, part 2, baby.
Hi, this is Bill Marianis,
This
host.
is old.
Hi, this is John Maddox. You know, we have nearly 250,000 downloads of our audio files every month at Ancient Faith Radio, and we know that
It's far more than that
represents
now.
thousands of listeners. If just a small percentage of you who download our podcasts would give even $10, $15, or $20, you just can't imagine the impact that would have. If you are a regular listener to Ancient Faith Radio and have not yet supported us, please consider doing so today. Go to ancientfaith.com and click on Donate Online. Thank you.
The Orthodox Church is the historical church, the church of holy tradition. And those who count themselves as Orthodox Christians share a uniquely historical consciousness, understanding that the saints, priests, and Orthodox laymen of the past play a crucial part in their journeys toward salvation. However, there is one area of Orthodox history that very few of us know anything about: the story of Orthodoxy in the Americas. Ancient Faith Radio is thus happy to present American Orthodox History with Matthew Namey. Matthew is a writer and lecturer specializing in early American Orthodoxy and the Associate Director of the Society for Orthodox Christian History in the
Flame Mama.
Welcome back to American Orthodox History. Earlier we discussed the episcopal career and the Orthodox conversion of Ingram Irvine, otherwise known as Father Nathaniel. And today we'll be continuing our look at Irvine's life, and this time we'll focus on his years as an Orthodox priest. But first, a brief recap. Ingram Irvine had been an Episcopal priest for about a quarter of a century. He was around 50 years old, and in 1900 he was defrocked by his bishop. Irvine was a fighter, though, and he tried for 5 years to have himself reinstated, always maintaining that he was unjustly defrocked. But all his efforts failed, and in November of 1905 he converted to Orthodoxy and was ordained a priest by St. Tikhon in the Russian cathedral in New York City. At the time, Irvine was a national celebrity, and his conversion made headlines across the country.
I'll be right back. we're back.
Many prominent Episcopalians were outraged that St. Tikhon would dare to do such a thing. And as for Irvine himself, his conversion was quite sincere. It wasn't just a matter of expediency. He had honestly come to believe that the Orthodox Church was the true church, and he would believe that for the rest of his life. Irvine never did have his own parish as an Orthodox priest. He was already 56 years old when he converted and was ordained, and so St. Tikhon assigned him to do English work, which is the term they used. Irvine wrote articles in English for both the Russian Archdiocese magazine, the Vestnik, and also St. Raphael's Syro-Arab Diocese magazine, Al-Kalimat, the Word. Irvine published a number of books on Orthodoxy in the English language, and he and his wife taught Sunday school at the Syrian Cathedral in Brooklyn. He held English language services in the various of the churches in the New York area. Irvine was also a close advisor to both Saints Tikhon and Raphael. Up until St. Tikhon left America for Russia in 1907, up to that point, Irvine was directly under St. Tikhon, worked very closely with him, and Irvine, when Tikhon returned to Russia in 1907, Irvine wrote a tribute to St. Tikhon in Al-Kalimat, in St. Raphael's magazine. And Irvine said in part, "I never knew a bishop who more truly possessed the characteristics of the Good Shepherd than Archbishop Tikhon. He had something about him which drew young and old instinctively to him." Irvine noted St. Tikhon's firmness, his unwavering character. But he was also a hospitable man, Irvine said. He warmly received guests, even after long church services. Irvine wrote, "To see the Archbishop celebrate at the liturgy was an inspiration. In every word, act, and posture he was perfect, yet unconscious of self because of his reverent and natural spirit." It's clear that Irvine viewed St. Tikhon as the ideal hierarch, in contrast with many of the bishops that he had known in the Episcopal Church. Irvine went on to say, "Of all men, I shall miss him the most. I am an American canon," which means priest, "the only one in the Russian Church in the United States. It was Archbishop Tikhon who received me. There was a little misunderstanding at the time on the part of many in the Anglican Communion, and the Archbishop received his share of misrepresentation. But he stood unmoved in the midst of a most cruel and trying ordeal." Irvine was equally impressed with St. Raphael. After St. Tikhon returned to Russia in 1907, as I said, Irvine was transferred to St. Raphael's jurisdiction. When St. Raphael died in 1915, Irvine delivered one of the eulogies at his funeral. And he also published a tribute in the Russian church magazine, the Vestnik. And Irvine wrote, "We see him now in his true light, great and good, learned and yet humble as a little child, a brave champion for the Orthodox faith, yet filled with love for all mankind." End quote. After St. Tikhon's departure, Irvine and the English work were transferred to St. Raphael's jurisdiction, and Irvine worked very closely with St. Raphael, even writing letters on St. Raphael's behalf, which St. Raphael would then sign as his own. In other words,
White
Irvine
mask!
was a ghostwriter for St.
White
Raphael.
mask, black mask.
For a time, in the first decade of the 20th century, St. Raphael had a close relationship with the Episcopal Church. And in 1908, he became the Orthodox vice president of the new Anglican and Eastern Orthodox Churches Union. Now, this group was an ecumenical group, as we would say today, which was aimed at promoting the friendship and they hoped, the eventual unification of Orthodoxy and Anglicanism. Shortly after this, St. Raphael actually gave permission for his people in extreme circumstances to seek the services of the Episcopal clergy. And this was supposed to be an exceptional thing. Someone was dying and there was no Orthodox priest, an Episcopal priest could perform the funeral. Or if there was an Orthodox child born with no Orthodox church nearby, then an Episcopal priest could baptize the child, and then later when an Orthodox clergyman was available, then the sacrament of chrismation could be administered. This was, like I said, an exception, but some Episcopal priests began telling the Syrian Orthodox in America that now the two bodies, Orthodox and Episcopalian, were fully united, and that the Orthodox didn't even need to bother with their own priests, but that they could instead rely on the Episcopalians. They could even start attending Episcopal churches and joining and becoming members and just being Episcopalian, and that this was okay. And this did happen. Meanwhile, as this was going on, Irvine kept a close eye on what was going on in the Episcopal Church. And in 1910, the Episcopal Church had just appointed a committee to learn, quote, how to deal with the foreign population. In other words, how to convert immigrants to the Episcopal Church. Irvine understood this to be a direct threat on orthodoxy in America, and this prompted him to write an open letter to the Orthodox bishops in America. And this is a somewhat alarmingly bold letter in which Irvine goes over point by point what he sees as the problems and challenges that orthodoxy in America must overcome. And he goes on to suggest that the Orthodox in America should adopt as their motto, aggressive Orthodox Catholicity for the truth's sake. This letter is a remarkable document, and we'll examine it in more detail in just a moment. But first, I'd like to talk about the letter and Irvine's own views and their potential effect on St. Raphael.
Whoops.
Now, at this point, Irvine, as I said, was under St. Raphael's jurisdiction. He was very closely associated with St. Raphael, writing for Al-Kalimat, teaching Sunday school in Brooklyn at the Syrian Cathedral. And as I mentioned before, he was also helping St. Raphael with his English correspondence, writing letters on his behalf, just as Irvine had helped St. Tikhon. And the year after Irvine's open letter, in September of 1911, St. Raphael issued two somewhat famous letters on the situation with the Episcopalians. And the first of these was written to the Anglican branch of the Church Union group, the ecumenical group. And in that letter, St. Raphael resigned as vice president and withdrew from the organization altogether. The second letter he wrote to his flock directly, and in it he rescinded his previous permission for the Syrian Orthodox to be ministered to by Episcopal priests in those extreme situations. And this second letter, the one written to the flock, actually is available in various places on the internet. Irvine's 1910 open letter, combined with his close relationship with St. Raphael, seemed to have influenced St. Raphael's thinking on this and his decision to write these monumental letters. Now, furthermore, both of those letters appear to have actually been written by Father Ingram Nathaniel Irvine. I've read dozens and dozens of Irvine's personal letters, of his writings, his essays, and he has a very distinctive writing style. And when you read the two St. Raphael letters, comparing them then to Irvine's other work, it's clear that Irvine was the author of those letters that St. Raphael signed. The style, the vocabulary, it's obviously Irvine. Now, it's not like St. Raphael just put his name on somebody else's letters, but he clearly commissioned Irvine to craft the documents. They collaborated on this. And Irvine being a talented writer, St. Raphael trusted him to put things just right. This really does show how close the two men were and how much St. Raphael trusted Irvine. Irvine's, getting back to his 1910 open letter, it did a lot more than just warn the Orthodox bishops of an Anglican threat. In one part of this open letter, Irvine raises the issue of the perception of orthodoxy in the West. And in particular, Irvine identified the treatment of Jews in Russia as a real problem. The Episcopal Church had recently proposed an international Christian conference on anti-Semitism, and Irvine actually asked that he himself be appointed to be one of the Orthodox delegates to this conference. He felt that he was in a unique position of understanding both the Western and Eastern sides of things, and that he could act as something of a bridge. This is a common theme in his ministry. This idea that he could be a bridge between East and West, that he could help bridge the gap between Western and Eastern Christianity. Irvine also talked about the jurisdictional situation in America at the time. Now, of the three largest non-Russian Orthodox groups, you had the Greeks, the Syrians, and the Serbs, in addition to the Russians. Those were the four largest of the Orthodox ethnic groups. And of those groups, the Syrians and the Serbs both had at least a nominal relationship with the Russian Archdiocese. And I've gone into this in greater detail elsewhere, but they at least had a nominal connection to the Russian Archdiocese. The Greeks, on the other hand, really didn't have any relationship at all, with very few exceptions, didn't have a relationship with the Russian Archdiocese. And Irvine saw this as a major problem. Among other things, in his view, it sent a confusing message to non-Orthodox. This is something we hear today, but back then, this was a rather unusual position. Irvine said, "Let it be hoped that at least here in the United States, where children of parents unfriendly to each other in the old..."
Hello, if you've made it past the ads, welcome to the Orthodox Oasis. My name is Jerome, or Hieronymus. I'm playing some Final Fantasy and listening to a podcast called The American Orthodox History. Something I wanted to listen to.
There is strength. And as I said, in this, Irvine was far ahead of his time. Even though, St. Tikhon was already at that time proposing a united orthodoxy in America, Irvine's view that it was a problem in relating to non-Orthodox for us to not all be united, this was a rather new argument, and it's obviously a very common one today. Most Orthodox in America in Irvine's time were just too focused on their own ethnic and clan identities to give much thought to this broader Orthodox unity. Now, related to this, Irvine complained about the situation with the Orthodox youth in America. He wrote, "The youth have no services in English and remain only nominal Orthodox. Nearly all attend the services in either Protestant or Roman churches." Irvine elaborated on this problem in other letters and articles. In a letter to Archbishop Platon, the Russian archbishop who succeeded St. Tikhon, a few years later, Irvine wrote, "In the last 8 years, I have not been absent from duty for a single Sunday. My work amongst the Syrians has nearly broken me down. I am a nervous wreck, and I am told that I must take a rest. You know, Your Grace, they are a people different from all others. They have a lovely bishop, but the people here run wild after material gain. Rome and Protestantism spoiled them in Syria, and here they have gone madly after money and dress. But besides, the children are encouraged to go to any church or Sunday school where they can have a good time. I have done my best to teach the doctrines of the Orthodox faith, but there never has been one liturgy said in English, yet all the children know English better than Arabic." But Irvine didn't just complain privately in letters to a bishop. In one of his articles in Al-Kalimat, he wrote a scathing rebuke of negligent Syrian parents. And I'll read a section from it. It's a really amazing thing to read. Irvine wrote, "You say that you like to take them visiting or to the park or somewhere else on Sunday afternoon. You cannot, you say, take them during the week, for it would be taking you away from your business. Strange excuse. You do not want to rob yourself out of $1, but you do not care whether you rob God out of the souls of your children, for whom he shed his precious blood upon the cross. O foolish parent, who hath bewitched you? What demon is it which has blinded your eyes, dulled your understanding, and filled you with unnatural love for your children? Do you think that love only means the satisfying of the eye, the ear, the body, or the palate? Alas, these are the last to be thought of. I do not say that you must not make your children happy and take good care of them. Far from this. They ought to be treasured as jewels. But we will take it for granted that you send your children to Sunday school. Which Sunday school is it? You belong to the Holy Orthodox Church? Yes, you say. Well then, do you think that if your children go to a Roman Catholic, Protestant Episcopal, Methodist, Baptist, Presbyterian, Maronite, Lutheran, Congregational, or what other religious body you thus may select, that they are instructed in the doctrine, discipline, and worship of the church to which you belong? Why, you are wild to think so. If you want your children to grow up in your faith, the faith of the holy martyrs of the first 8 centuries, you will never have them do so unless they are sent to their own Sunday school. End quote. I don't think I can add anything to that, so we'll just move on. Getting back to the 1910 open letter, Irvine had some views that today we would actually probably call liberal. He said, for instance, that church services were too long and too grouped together for a missionary setting. And keep in mind that in especially in the Russian churches, you would frequently have a bunch of services packed together on a Saturday night. And he said, our one long midday service are not conducive to missionary success in America. This is not the old world. He then observed that a great majority of our flocks are gazers and hearers instead of being participants in the services. And so Irvine went on to advocate congregational singing, and even went so far to suggest the use of instruments. But you can't really put Irvine into a box. In a 1917 article on the church calendar, which I don't know if it was actually ever published, we have a handwritten draft that Irvine wrote, he addressed the pressure on the church to switch from the Julian to the Gregorian calendar. This was a real pressing issue at the time, and would actually happen in many of the Orthodox churches not too many years later. And Irvine began by talking about how difficult the calendar difference made life for Orthodox lay people. However, he went on to conclude that this difficulty, in his words, serves a good purpose. Besides it not being such a bad thing to suffer for one's faith, Irvine said that it is a standing protest against the encroachments of Rome on the rights of Christendom, and suggests investigation on the part of seekers after ancient ways.
Hello! If you've made it past the
Protestants.
ads,
So,
commercials,
in Irvine's
the
opinion,
6 minutes of...
inconvenience
Oh, no.
of the old
Sorry.
calendar could itself be a tool for missionary work.
Oh, no.
Irvine was rather
Can't make it
strict
past
on
the
other matters
ads.
as well.
No one can.
In 1950,
It's too
Raphael
much.
died, which left vacant his position as bishop to the Syrians in America. And by 1917, the Russian bishops were leaning towards replacing Raphael with Archimandrite Efthymios of Faish, a very controversial figure. And in yet another alarmingly bold letter, Irvine argued very strongly against the consecration of Efthymios, in large part on the grounds that Efthymios was a Freemason. Irvine said, if a bishop of the church is a Freemason, then every priest had better be a Mason in his diocese, for otherwise it may follow that a Jew, an infidel, an atheist, etc., or the lowest saloon keeper, or house of ill-fame manager, as member, would have more influence as a Mason with the Masonic bishop than the priest who was not a member of the order. End quote. Irvine also observed that at his own ordination to the priesthood, he had been asked if he was a Freemason, and he said, have we changed? Are our conditions variable? Irvine concluded by declaring that if Efthymios or any other Mason were to be consecrated a bishop, quote, I will never recognize him as a bishop. I cannot serve God and Mammon in the episcopate. Now, the rest of the story is that Efthymios of Faish did end up being consecrated a bishop, and in many respects, it did turn out to be a disaster.
Is there actually a town over here?
That's a story for another day. I can't talk about Ingram Irvine without talking about his feud with Isabel Hapgood. You may have heard of Isabel Hapgood. She was a prominent translator of Russian works into the English language. And most famously, she translated the service book into English, commissioned by St. Tikhon. She was a year younger than Irvine, so they're about the same age. But she wasn't actually Orthodox herself. She was an Episcopalian, and Irvine strongly disliked her. They did not see eye to eye. In a letter to Archbishop Evdokim was the Russian archbishop in the mid-teens, just before the Revolution. Irvine called Hapgood that vixen Miss Hapgood. What a liar. She has damned the church for years. In 1915, Isabel Hapgood had written a letter to Archbishop Evdokim, and the letter was published very prominently in the Russian church magazine, the Vestnik. And in it,
There's a town. Oh my goodness.
Recent concert
How did I miss this so
that
many
the
times?
St. Nicholas Cathedral Choir
Hello?
had given in New York. And this concert was apparently a big success, and Hapgood went on in rather snobbish fashion to talk about how important a world-class choir was for the church and its public relations. And she concluded, "The cathedral choir is immensely more important to your church and mission in this country than 20 little new parishes. Please let us have a splendid choir." Needless to say, Irvine was disgusted with Hapgood's letter. And in the next issue of the Vestnik, Irvine published a long editorial rebuking Hapgood. He said, "Our Archbishop was not called by the Holy Ghost to consecrate our choir leaders for roving singing bands to help and please new Orthodox churchgoers. Music is a luxury, but the bread of life, distributed through 20 little new parishes, is a necessity." Irvine went on to call Hapgood's letter her musical heresy, and he pointed out that she herself was a Protestant and not an Orthodox Christian. I'm afraid I've run out of time today, and we've got quite a bit more to say about Irvine. So in the future, we'll come back and revisit
gotta finish
Irvine
this.
yet again, talking about his later Orthodox
There's so
career
much
and
more.
his later life as we conclude the Irvine story.
Da-da-da-da-da-da.
You've been listening to American Orthodox History with Matthew Namey. Matthew is a writer and lecturer specializing in early American Orthodoxy and the Associate Director of the Society for Orthodox Christian History in the Americas. For supplemental material related to this episode, please visit orthodoxhistory.org. This has been a listener-supported presentation of Ancient Faith Radio.
Ancient Faith Radio. Hey, thanks for watching. You can find more VODs here on YouTube, as well as other projects, including reviews of games I've played and movies I've watched. You could also stop by the channel, Orthodox Oasis, over on Twitch. Join us live, hang out, say hi, and all that good stuff. Otherwise, thanks for watching. This has been the Orthodox Oasis. My name is Jerome Hieronymus, and may the Lord bless you and keep you always. Bye.